guys, it's Mel. Welcome to my channel. So welcome back to an audiobooks novice epic audiobook journey. If you watch my February wrap-up, you'll know that I listened to 2 books on audiobook in February. One was Daisy Jones and the Six, and I've actually been listening to that across January and February. And the other was On Lunar Time by Crawly. You'll also know what I thought of those books. So I feel like that's probably a good place to start. So let me start first of all with the book that I really enjoyed, which was On Lunar Time by Crawly. This is a young adult magical realism book dealing with time travel, and I just really enjoyed it. I thought it was really well written. I thought it was really well paced. I thought the story was really interesting and fun. I liked the characters, and I also thought that Merphy, who is the narrator, did a really great job. For those of you who don't know who Merphy is, I will link her booktube channel in the description below. She is a really popular booktuber for very good reason. She does so much work. She does reviews, she does vlogs, she does wrap-ups, she does discussions about various things. She currently has a series she's calling Dear Authors, where she invites her subscribers to suggest different things that authors could do or do differently or not do to make readers happier. And she also happens to be an audiobook narrator. So I heard about this book from her channel. She talked about her experience narrating the book and also how great she thinks the book is. A book that I have really enjoyed in the past, The Time Traveller's Wife by Audrey Niffinger, is a book that I think is relatively similar to On Lunar Time because of the similarities between a book I've really loved and really great narration and a really great story. I really enjoyed that book. I don't feel like I want to go into too much more detail about the book specifically. I have talked about what it's about, as I said, in my February wrap-up, so go check that out. I'll link that below. If you watched my February wrap-up, you'll have seen that I didn't absolutely love Daisy Jones and the Six. Like I said in that video, I didn't hate Daisy Jones and the Six by any means. There were definitely aspects of the story that I enjoyed. However, it had been built up for me so much over the time that I'd been seeing people talk about it on BookTube that I found that I just didn't love it as much as I was expecting to. For a little while I was worried that I was maybe missing the point or doing something wrong, because I felt like I must be the only person on the planet not completely enamored of Daisy Jones and the Six, until I saw a video by Steph from Stacks on Stacks on Stacks, who again I will link in the description below, who said that she felt the same. She didn't hate it, she thought it was definitely elements were quite good and she still enjoyed it, but she didn't love it and she felt like she was disappointed. And I felt the same way. So anyway, like I said, the majority of people that I have watched on BookTube who have mentioned this book have absolutely loved it. And because I didn't completely love it myself, and because I know that one other person at least felt the same way, it did get me thinking about why we like books or why we don't like books. And as you all know, if you've been following this audiobook journey, you will know that the point of the audiobook journey is that I'm relatively new to listening to audiobooks, and the first one that I listened to I found I didn't enjoy very much, and I'm still unsure again whether that was due to the medium. I chose the wrong medium, whether it's because I don't really like audiobooks in general, or whether it was the narrator, or what the situation was. And I am finding myself wondering the same thing about Daisy Jones and the Six. I have listened to another full cast audio book prior to listening to Daisy Jones and the Six, so if you want to know more of my thoughts about that, I am going to link my playlist for the audiobook journey in the description also, so that you can go back and find out all of my different thoughts. But I really enjoyed that book. That was The Invisible Women's Society by Nikki, Gemmel, and that was a full cast audio, so it's certainly not the full cast nature. In fact, that's one of the things about Daisy Jones and the Six that I really enjoyed. And I really enjoyed Jingo, which I listened to in December, written by Pratchett and narrated by Nigel Planer. And I really enjoyed On Lunar Time by Amber Crawly and narrated by Merphy. So obviously it isn't either a full cast nor is it one single narrator that is making me like or dislike an audiobook. And by that suggestion, I'm going to make a wild assumption that it's not in fact the medium itself of audiobooks. I mean, the thing is, as we all know, we are all different. We all have different feelings and opinions about things. We all have different expectations, and we all have different knowledge that we bring to every single book that we read. And each time we read a book, that further informs our knowledge and our experiences that we then bring to the next book that we read. So obviously, just because many, many people have really enjoyed this book doesn't necessarily mean that I would enjoy this book any more than any other book that I enjoy or don't enjoy. I read books physically, and sometimes I enjoy them and sometimes I don't. I do like books that friends of mine like, and sometimes I don't like books that friends of mine like. And it's the same thing if I'm watching a television show or a movie or listening to a podcast or a radio play. It's not necessarily the medium that informs how I feel about something. It's also not just necessarily that I don't like that particular style or that particular topic. It might just be the mood that I was in when I read a book or listened to a book. So this has left me quite curious about how people feel about audiobooks versus physical books. And I hear quite often on BookTube that people are either reading a physical book and finding they're not enjoying it or not getting into it, and so they switch to audio and then they start to like it more, or vice versa. So I reached out to a few booktubers such as Steph from Stacks on Stacks on Stacks, Faye from Mystery Date with a Book, Michael Nip from, I think his channel is just actually called Michael Nip. I asked them what format that they had read Daisy Jones. Fortunately, I'm not 100% sure how Steph read it, but I do know that Michael Nip read it on an e-reader and Faye read it physically in a physical book. So obviously it's not what I have heard suggested by some other people, that you will have a better experience if you listen to the audiobook, because some people have liked it just as much reading it physically. Before I talk any further, I have said a few times that I will link people's channels in the description below. I'll just make a blanket statement now that anyone that I have mentioned already and anyone that I mention in the rest of this video, I will link their channels in the description below, so you can go and check them out. And they're all really, really cool booktubers and really lovely people, so I definitely suggest that you check them all out. They're really, really great. Anyway, to be honest, I actually don't think that I would like Daisy Jones and the Six any more if I read it physically than I have done listening to it audibly. The reason for that is because one of the things that I found was keeping me from really, really enjoying the book was how swiftly they switch between points of view. Now, don't get me wrong, I am a person who enjoys different points of view in books, but when it switches very frequently, for example, in Daisy Jones and the Six, there were quite a few instances where they would have one person saying what was probably about a paragraph or two worth of their experience, and then it would switch to another person, and they'd just maybe say something like, "That was a great show," and that would be it. I don't have a problem with that as a choice. That's Taylor Jenkins Reid's choice, and she obviously had an intention behind that choice. However, personally, I found that that was a bit of too much of a switching, and so if I was to read it physically, I think that would probably annoy me a little bit as well. And the reason I think that is because I actually DNF'd a book later last year that had a lot of switching different viewpoints, not quite as often as that one, but a lot of different viewpoint switching, and I just found that I couldn't keep track of it, and so I DNF'd it. So I feel like it would probably be fairly similar for Daisy Jones and the Six. Now, the interesting thing about everything that I've said so far is that were I to be watching some kind of special about a band which switched between interviewing different band members and producers and journalists in the same way that Taylor Jenkins Reid's novel has done, that wouldn't annoy me. I would be quite happy to watch that, and I would find it quite interesting. I seem to keep making the mistake of leaving my window open. Oops. Anyway, yeah, so I would potentially still enjoy that. Where was I? Yeah, so now the thing is though that I am, probably as most people are, unlikely to get anything out of a documentary like that that is about a band that I don't like. So of course it has to be a band that I like. So perhaps the fact that Daisy Jones and the Six, although it has been likened to Fleetwood Mac, is not Fleetwood Mac and is not in fact a band that I have any emotional connection to in and of themselves, because they don't exist. Maybe that's part of the reason why I didn't enjoy Daisy Jones and the Six as much as I had anticipated. Again, I want to reiterate that this is not to say that I didn't like Daisy Jones and the Six. I definitely liked some elements of the story. I definitely appreciate what Taylor Jenkins Reid was trying to do, and I respect the choices that she made as an author, and I think for the type of story that she was trying to write, it actually was a really good choice. So I wouldn't even suggest that she write it in a different way. However, it just, for whatever reason, it just wasn't, it didn't work as well for me as obviously it did for a lot of other people. I did say in my wrap-up that another reason was because I felt like there was a lot of angst, and although, again, the angst itself is a part of the story and that's completely fine. A story can be angsty and that doesn't mean I won't like it, but it just felt like the angst parts went on a little too long, and I got a little bit tired of hearing a lot of angst that I didn't feel was necessarily moving the story forward or anything particularly extra to the plot. She could have cut a lot of that out, and I personally would have found that I enjoyed it more. That's just, like I said, my personal opinion. I mean, I know that people are just living their lives, but you know, I'm filming here. Anyway, those are some of my thoughts about Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. So the reason why I approached a few different members of the booktube community to ask them in what format they had experienced Daisy Jones was because it really got me thinking about books as audiobooks. So like I said before, I'd heard quite a lot of people say that they really enjoyed Daisy Jones and the Six as an audiobook, and they felt that it was better served as an audiobook. And I've actually heard that about a few different audiobooks. Like I said, people have suggested that when they maybe are struggling to read a book, they start listening to it audibly, and then that's how they figure out that they can get into it. And it really got me thinking about the medium of books and about the idea of reading versus listening. And the question that I have in my head now that I want to pose to you is, can you say that a book is really a good book and has done its craft well if it's better as an audiobook? Because it is a written document. It's intended to be read. And yes, it's been turned into something audible, and for various reasons there are lots of people who can't experience a book any other way, and I am not saying they shouldn't have access to it, to the books. Of course not. I don't think that audio books are inferior in any way, but let's put aside people who can't experience a book by physically reading it and say that you have a choice between listening to a book and reading a book, and you do both with the same book and you prefer the audiobook. Is it really a good book? Would it be not better off as a podcast or a radio show? I'm not saying I have an answer to this question by any stretch of the imagination, and please, like I said, don't get me wrong, I am not suggesting that we should stop making audiobooks. I've obviously enjoyed several different audiobooks by now, so it's not that I have an issue with audiobooks, but I'm just posing the question really for the sake of posing the question. But the thing is that this also brings up another question about the nature of storytelling in general. So in modern times, we now have audiobooks and we have various capacities to listen or experience stories in a multiple of ways. So we have audiobooks, we have the physical book, we have ebooks where you can change the size and color of the text on the page as well as the page itself. We also, branching out into TV and movies, we also have that. We also have music. We have a variety of different forms of entertainment and ways of hearing stories. But all of that is actually really quite new, 100 years or so. So before that, it was just people would play music or people would read books. But even before that, you heard your stories orally. Writing the stories down is actually, in the grand scheme of things, relatively new. So yes, I'm wondering about a modern book written as a book with the intention that someone would read it. Is it still a good book, or as good a book if it's better when it's heard? But isn't that what a story is? Isn't there something in us, in the back of our primordial brains, that hears stories? We're wired to hear the sound of our parents. We're wired to hear sounds and to respond to sounds. We're wired to acquire language incredibly quickly and very, very young. And we don't learn to read or write until many years later, long past the point where we've already acquired a really huge amount of knowledge about words and language and structure and syntax and grammar and so on. Is my question inherently wrong? Should my question be the other way around? Is a book actually only as good as its audiobook? So where does it leave the future of my audiobook journey? That's an excellent question. And what I've actually decided for the next couple of months is that I'm going to give listening to memoirs and autobiographies a try. Because I really liked listening to Jennifer Beals and Judy Greer and the other amazing actors who were in Daisy Jones and the Six. And I know, for example, that I love Stephen Fry's voice. And I think that memoir and autobiography would actually be really, really cool when narrated by the person who actually wrote it. I mean, obviously that's not always possible, but you know, wherever it is possible. So I think that's what I'm going to do for a little while. But the other thing that I'm thinking about doing is going back and looking through some of the books that I've read via audiobook and what I've liked and what I haven't liked, and potentially trying to read some of those books physically to see what I think of them and compare and contrast. If you've watched my recent March TBR, you'll know that I have quite a full month, so I'm not sure if I'll get to it in this month, but I'll certainly try, and I can always do it next month. But that is the plan for now, to listen to some memoirs and also to read some of the books physically and see what I make of them. Will I have the same opinion? Will I not? Anyway, guys, that is it from me for my audiobook journey for the moment. For all those people out there that I know really, really like Daisy Jones and the Six, I apologise if any of you were offended or upset by anything that I said about Daisy Jones or anything that I said about listening to audiobooks. None of my comments were intended to be hurtful or offensive, and if they were in any way hurtful or offensive, I really, really do apologise. It certainly wasn't my intention, and I really hope that you will forgive me if that is the case. Anyway, that's it for me today. If you have any ideas or thoughts or answers or comments about any of these things, please do put them down in the comments below. I'd really love to hear your thoughts and opinions. I really hope that you did like this video. If you did, please give me a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you next time.